Right. So we are live. The second, slowly. Right, we are on. Hi, everybody. We are live here with Carlos Plazola from the Decriminalize Nature movement. My name is Jonathan. I'm from Thank You Plant Medicine. We're a global grassroots movement to destigmatize entheogenics and psychoactive compounds, plants, and we are honored to have Carlos today here. Carlos, I invite you to present yourself.
Hi, everyone. Carlos Plazola. I'm co-chair, or chair rather, Decriminalize Nature, co-founder. Decriminalize Nature started in Oakland in around January 2019, and it's become also a global movement. I'm happy to be here with Jonathan and helping advance the cause of these beautiful sacred plants that have our back.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlos. I'm excited about this conversation because there is a new initiative coming up that the Decriminalize Nature Oakland is working on. So we're going to be hearing about that. But before that, I would like you to take a few minutes and review and help us understand how the Decriminalize Nature came about. A brief history of what how did you come together? Where did you go in the past? What was your worldview? Organizing in many cities around the U.S. So give us a little bit of a history of what's been done so far.
Sure, yeah. And let me just point folks to decriminalizenature.org. That's our website. And if you go to our organizer's handbook there, you'll find a really nice history of our origin story, which is a really beautiful story. I'll start with myself and then how I came into the group, and then from there how the group evolved. So for my own personal journey, I've had a lifetime of healing from some stuff as a young person, as a Mexican immigrant in the U.S. or child of Mexican immigrants in the U.S., being part of the underclass, so to speak, single mom, raising 3 kids in the east side, San Jose. It was a bit of a turbulent childhood, and I did a number of things. Education, I got my undergraduate degree in biology, my master's in environmental science. I lived in the rainforest for a while, worked as a social justice organizer, as a political organizer, and then eventually as a private business person. All the while seeking to heal myself and manifest it in community. But it wasn't until I had a mushroom journey in October 2018 that I really understood the power of these plants, which caused me to ask the question, why are they illegal? These should be readily available to society, and why were they made illegal? So I sought community. I landed in this really beautiful San Francisco Bay Area community of the psychedelic community. And what I came to learn is that these were not made illegal because they were dangerous. They were made, or perhaps dangerous to some, but they weren't dangerous to the individual. They were dangerous to our current political structure because it causes, as we know, people to open up their awareness and have access to healing. Found this community. We gathered, there were about 12 of us from the San Francisco Bay Area. And we had a conversation as we were getting to know each other in this core group. It was the Sacred Garden Community, San Francisco Psychedelic Society, Erie, Entheogenic Research Integration Education Group came together, and we decided that we would decriminalize entheogens with our city council. So we started that January 2019 and it quickly started picking up steam. By June of 2019, we had passed Decriminalize Nature resolution in Oakland. Soon thereafter, we had a large number of people in different cities asking us to support them. And then by the end of that year of 2019, we had connected with over 100 cities in the US. I think at that time it was about 5 different countries. Now we have different groups in, I think, 8 different countries. And since then we've passed the Decriminalize Nature resolution in Santa Cruz, Ann Arbor, and also in Washington, D.C. most recently.
Mhm.
So the momentum is growing, and the whole idea is that it's a human right to have access to these entheogenic plants and fungi, and it's also a human right to be able to do healing in ceremony, community ceremony. And we have an initiative, the last manifestation, we have an initiative coming to the Oakland City Council, which we're asking all of you to join us in sending emails to our city council, encouraging them to support us. My email is decriminature@gmail.com. And there's 4 things that we're asking our city council to do. One is to, well, we've already asked them to decriminalize nature, which they've done, and we're grateful for. Next thing is to legally protect ceremony so that I, as an individual, can engage in ceremony. The third thing is to enable the creation of community serving micro enterprises so that this doesn't go in the way of cannabis and becomes a venture capital grab of value creation, that it stays in community. If we that the dollars stay in our community, so to speak, and help enable people to emerge out of healing process and into jobs and housing. The last thing is that we conduct community-based research, so we understand how the ecosystem of healing and community works, in addition to understanding how it works in a clinical setting, which is already being done by Johns Hopkins and others. Those are the 4 things, and I'll end it by saying that in California, Senator Scott Wiener announced on November 10th that he was going to be sponsoring statewide legislation to decriminalize and legalize psychedelics. City of Oakland now, working with us, are going to be making a big push to ensure that our agenda becomes his agenda, as well as clinical and medical, which I'm sure have their own lobbyists and advocates for that. That brings you up to speed.
Thank you so much. It's fascinating to see how movements grow in such an organic way, and how from 12 people you could pass resolutions in a few cities, and it's gaining force. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And from being active with the Thank You Plant Medicine movement, you find out that there's so many people around the world wanting this to happen, and it's a walking the fine line of assisting everybody, but moving the ball forward. And it's I'm sure it's a momentum. It's a big task. I wanted to, if you can go a little bit about more detail. Because I understand there is an important date on December 15th.
Yes.
And if you can talk a little bit more into detail of this initiative, what are you looking to do?
Sure.
Kind of take viewers into what's the impact, what's the planning of it, what's the reasoning for it. So kind of.
Yeah. So, our approach to all of this has always been, let's lead by example here in Oakland. We have an amazing city council. We are one of the most diverse cities in the US. I think we're 60% BIPOC community. We have a bit of everything here. Our wealth distribution, we have very low income, unhoused, we have low income. So it's a very high wealth. It's a very diverse city. And so if there's going to be a place where we experiment with how to reintroduce our plant healing allies into the urban community of the US, Oakland is a logical place to do it. So we're grateful that this can be an incubator for ideas here in the city of Oakland, that we have support of our council. Very soon after we passed Decriminalize Nature, many people were asking us, okay, so then how does that manifest in regulation? Right? It's great that you decriminalize, but what are you going to legalize? What are you going to actually encourage regulations around? And how are you going to source all of this need for plant medicine so you're not taking it from the rainforest or from sacred peyote gardens in Mexico? All
Right.
great questions. And so we decided that we wanted to tackle them by not pontificating and philosophizing, but actually going inward and saying, okay, how do we do it? And that from there grew the Oakland Community Healing Initiative. There's the first piece of Oakland Community Healing Initiative, which we've already done, is decriminalization. The second piece is protecting sacred ceremony. And that is a regulatory legal protection that we're asking the city of Oakland and now the state of California to pass, so that if there is a space holder, facilitator, curandero, shaman, medicine person who's holding space, that they not be prosecuted by the state or federal government. Their practice is ancient. It predates Western civilization's regulations. What they do, most of them do, is very high integrity and authentic. And we as a society have a way of monitoring and weeding out the ones who are in it for perhaps the wrong reasons. So what we've asked the city to do is just protect our right to heal in ceremony legally, as long as we follow certain safe practice guidelines and principles, which were crafted by community leaders in facilitation. And we've shared those publicly. Those were based off of the original safe practice guidelines that we submitted to the city back in June 8 of 2019, which had input from all kinds of facilitators and medicine people from around the US. So that's the second thing. The third thing is to create and support micro business enterprises. And this is a big one because for us to really be successful, we have to ensure that we're sourcing material locally, that we're doing it in a safe way, and that all of that is helping people create jobs, opportunities for our community. One question that we asked, which was an ethical question, is, so you're waking somebody up from deep trauma, then what? What opportunities are you giving them to heal? And to find a path out of it. And so for us, keeping the value of the in the community is important to us. And so that's where the micro business enterprise is important to figure out how we do that. And we have ideas around that. We think they're very good ideas. So that's the third part. The fourth part is public health research to learn about how we're healing, what the outcomes are of our healing models, and just keep improving. So we decided to do that. We talked to our council sponsor, Councilman Noel Gallo. He was supportive. And then all of a sudden we found, so what was coming to council was an ordinance to pass that in the actual municipal code, which would have been kind of revolutionary because we'd be reintroducing Western ancient practice into Western legislative models, which never happened. So it was pretty courageous. And we were on our way, and then Scott Wiener announced all of a sudden that Senator Scott Wiener announced that he was going to pass this legislation statewide, and it caught us all off guard because suddenly now all the attention is at the state level. So all of our council members and city attorneys said, okay, well, let's work with the senator because now he can offer us state level protection, which is really important. Because if the city did it and the state didn't, then the city would be fighting not just the federal government, but the state to protect protect ceremony. If we can work with the senator's office to protect that, now we have two layers of protection, the city and the state. The city would obviously feel better about that. So it presents a really beautiful opportunity for us. And that's what we're going to be doing now. On the 15th of December, we're coming to council for a vote on a resolution, which is different than an ordinance. An ordinance is a municipal code change. A resolution is the council request or opinion. It's asking the state of California to support the Oakland Community Healing Initiative. And it actually begins the process of implementation of the Oakland Community Healing Initiative with the city administrator's office. So a really important piece of legislation coming forward. And we're asking the community to support us because if we could pass this in Oakland and then get the state to support us, then now we've embedded into all of the conversation of psychedelics nationally and internationally, protections of our human right to heal with our plant allies as well on a personal level, but also in community. And the biggest threat in all of this conversation about psychedelics is that as it becomes a profiteering exercise at the clinical, medical, pharmaceutical model level, then it creates pressure to ban personal decriminalization for personal engagement, because it's not it creates abundance, which goes against the profit motive. So we're not against clinical, medical, or pharmaceutical, but we are really advocating for protections of human rights.
Right. As far as I understand from prior conversations, is that you're supporting both models and working together side by side rather than one's favor over the other. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because in my own family, I have family members who would heal more from a medical, who might be on SSRIs, who probably shouldn't go into community-based ceremony. And those folks deserve an opportunity to heal as well, and they would find better healing through a medical, pharmaceutical, strongly controlled environment. There are others in community who would do better in community-based ceremony, and there are some who just need therapy with some opening up of their trauma to go through the therapy process. So we support all the various models. We just see it's our mission in the world to protect community-based ceremony.
Right. I have a question regarding that because I went through the documents, and you guys talk about registering facilitators, training facilitators, registering participants, annual fees. Can you talk a bit about the practicalities of how it's going to happen so the viewers can understand?
Yeah, thank you. This has been a big part of our conversation with our core group here in Oakland. And our core group is made up of people who do a lot of space holding. The fundamental question is, who is the right person or organization to set the standards for what good facilitation is? And the answer is none of us, but all of us in community. So we wanted to create a process that enables dynamic emergence of good standards and good practice in community. And if you think about it, the way I told someone the other day is, imagine you sequester the human race for 50 years, and then you set them out into this current world, and you have all the traffic in the streets and on the freeways. You're going to have a very difficult time understanding how to maneuver streets because you become unfamiliar with them. And so we become conditioned to learn how to cross the street. We're reintroducing ourselves into plant medicine. We don't know how to do it as a society because it's been taken from us so long ago. We took it from us so long ago. So as you're reintroducing it, you need to leave space for people to relearn this. The big risk for us is when people who are sort of indoctrinated in Western risk management models, oh, what if something bad happens? Well, of course, something bad is going to happen because something bad always happens. This is real life. But unlike fentanyl, for example, we're not going to have tens of thousands of people dying. What will happen is that we'll learn and we'll adapt as a society. So we wanted to leave enough space for that adaptation to occur without the government coming in and saying we know better, despite the fact we've never done plant medicine, never held space. So what we've created is a safe practice guidelines and principles that was developed by our community of facilitators. And so anybody who wants to register to get legal protections from the city, which we'd encourage anybody who's going into ceremony to do once we pass it, is that they would just take a course. If you're a facilitator, you take an 8-hour course. If you're going to go into a ceremony as a participant, you take a 4-hour course. And this is a working model. It could be more or less. And then at that point, you'd become registered in a program. We, recognizing what happened in cannabis, we wouldn't want you to put a name down. What we're thinking is that someone might walk away with a certificate that then they would have to hold, as opposed to being on a registry. With the state protections, it becomes safer. We know that the federal government under cannabis is subpoenaing records in cannabis, and the state is blocking them and making them narrow their search. So the state is acting as a really good advocate on behalf of cannabis right now. So if we can pass this at the state level, then we hope that they would also protect citizens' rights for confidentiality. So we're still working all of this out. We don't have all the answers, but we're going through the process to figure out the best path. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. Another question I have, is it a non-profit for benefit or for-profit model that you're working in, and who is financing it? The city, the community? How is that done?
So this is a no profit model. In fact, there's language in the OCHI ordinance that says that none of this constitutes an allowance for profit models. What we're trying to do with that language initially is to create a window of opportunity for this to evolve without the pressures of for-profit, which tends to corrupt things of goodwill, right? We're coming into this with compassion as the primary motive. So, so the idea is that it's a minimal registration fee, if at all. If you can't afford it, you don't have to pay for it. We want to raise money to pay for people's registration if they're low income, and we're talking about $25 for registration. If you're a facilitator, Maybe it's a few $100s. And the reason I don't have a firm answer is because this is all part of our implementation process, which we've not gotten to yet, which we want to work through with the city administrator. We have to figure out what are their costs, how do we pay for that through registration, and if it's just one staff person who all fully loaded is $100,000, then how do we pay for that as community? The facilitators who have the greater benefit, because perhaps they'll get paid through donations for holding space. They pay a little more, whereas the people who would be participating in ceremony would be very low cost to register, if at all. And we try to raise money because at the end of the day, all of this is designed to serve the most vulnerable in our community. That's the way we've approached it. So we think about it as, if there's an unhoused person who wants to heal their trauma and step into ceremony and have no money, how can we create a process that enables them to do that and be held in community? So that's where we're coming from. And we think that if we keep the cost low enough, we can just raise through donations and contributions to cover their cost.
Okay, thank you for explaining that part. I understand that you mentioned a few times ceremonial context, but as far as I understand as well, there are many people in the Bay Area and throughout the world that do trip sitting functions, integration functions, people that work on their own with another person in an individual way, sort of psychedelic therapy. Would people be able to do that, or it's always will be in a context of a group sitting and a group work?
Yeah, so by and the way we encourage folks to think about this is, think of entheogens not as some dangerous things that are out there that have to be highly regulated. Think of them as tomatoes, or as oranges, or as herbs. And so I can grow my own tomatoes right now, and I can invite a friend over, and I can make dinner for that friend using my tomatoes that I'm actually growing out front, and then have a nice dinner. It's the same thing with a ceremony. If there's no exchange of funds, if you're not creating a business out of it, then there shouldn't be government oversight. However, if you start doing it as a business, then you should be required to get a business license to pay your taxes. And so what we're trying to do is just treat these entheogens as tomatoes, as oranges, as, you know, plants.
Okay.
So they would be able to do,
okay.
in our model, they'd be able to hold ceremony with their friend if they're paying for it, get a business license, pay your taxes.
Okay. Okay. Now I have a question that is a little bit delicate, but I'd like you to maybe, you know, give the opportunity to express about it. There was some, I wouldn't say, you know, disagreements, I'd say disagreements with many different actors as you guys build up the movement. And then specifically about, you know, wordings and you know, native rights. And I'd like to ask you, if you will, to share a bit about your perspective about it. What did you learn through the process of interacting with the different indigenous groups as the Decrim Nature movement grew and as it's moving forward?
Yeah, the first thing I want to point out, thank you for that. The first thing that I want to point out is that this initiative, Councilmember Gallo, who sponsored this, has indigenous background. His wife is also, and his children participate in the Red Market in Oakland, the Red Market in Santa Fe. She's from the Isleta tribe in New Mexico and Texas. So, and we checked in with the Ohlone. They were not really interested, the Ohlone representative here, our local tribe, and they were not particularly interested in getting involved in this issue. They had too many other priorities. So we did what we thought was the right thing at the time. And we did get some pushback and concern about including the word peyote and Native American church in one of our whereases where we honored the Native American church work. And it was requested we remove it, which we did. And we encouraged remove it in other future resolutions, and we did advise all of our groups to do that. However, at one point earlier this year, there was increasing concern from a few representatives of a particular group, and I don't want to get into names, but there were some representatives of particular groups who asked us for a public apology for including Peyote and Native American Church. It didn't feel right and authentic to issue a public apology because we didn't do anything wrong, so to speak. We didn't intentionally hurt anyone, nor do we think that decriminalizing entheogens is a hurtful thing. That is that the process of criminalizing plants is a kind of an absurd concept to us. Now that's different than honoring and giving reverence to the rights of indigenous people who have been the first nurturers of particular plants. And that we do honor. And so in that way, what we learned and how we've emerged from the criticism and the pushback is that we really should carve out language to honor the sacred gardens of peyote and develop relationships with folks in the rainforests who are caretakers of the plants that create ayahuasca. And so we created a sustainable relations committee with the intention of really looking at how we can keep these plant medicines conserved and protected in sacred garden areas for the indigenous communities, to honor their ways, to not co-opt their ways of doing ceremony, but rather learn from them in an honorable way. My own experience as my own background as a human is my grandmother was indigenous from Mexico. And I do think this is important. So I want to highlight this point. This has been a good learning opportunity for me. My grandmother was an indigenous woman in Mexico, in Jalisco. And the trauma that emerged from her being kicked and her family and my ancestors being kicked off their land is a real thing. It manifested in a great deal of trauma in my history. But when I come into the United States, it's a different political arena because of the boundaries that were set up through colonialism. We set up these borders. And so if you're an indigenous person in the United States that is on this side of the border, it's a very different reality, political reality, than if you're an indigenous person in Mexico. And just recognizing that, but at the end of the day, we're all in it together. So the other thing that I realized, and I think we realize, is the importance of conversation, sitting together and working through these issues because they're complicated. So with respect to the state legislation, what we're going to encourage the state legislators to do is to honor and recognize the sacred gardens of our indigenous communities of the U.S., to protect those for the indigenous, and to honor their history with peyote.
Yes, thank you so much for answering it in an extensive way. But it's something it's interesting, you know. We work more on a global level in terms of the people we interact with, and there is a lot of nuances that come up from the U.S. because also the U.S. is one of the places in the West that is mostly advancing in decriminalizing, legalizing, making it available for the public. Like if you compare it with European countries, for example. So I'm not jealous or envy you for trading and learning as you go through the process of learning who are the people that are part of the panorama, legislative, indigenous, and it's super difficult. So I want to recognize that. And ask you what you learned, because I know it's a learning process as you move forward. May
I speak to that? Because I think you raise a great point, Jonathan, for all of us. But I only take responsibility for what I have control of, which is me, and the extent to which I can manifest that with my co-conspirators in Decriminalize Nature. But at the end of the day, I'm not in control of that either. Which is that we're all growing together. Right, because we're all emerging. We all have so much to learn. We're all emerging towards that final state of ultimate love and compassion. And each of us, I think, is a work in progress. So I do just want to land in the place, which is we have to keep talking to each other. As much as we hurt each other, that's what we do as human beings. And it's not intentional. I think most of the time we don't intend to hurt each other, but we hurt each other. And what's important for us who have the higher, for us who really are walking the path of compassion and love, it's to stay in there talking to each other. And so this is my call out for folks who perhaps I've hurt, is invite them to sit with me and let's sit together in good spirit and communicate.
Yeah, great. I can attest to, a recent work we did here in our little group, and we actually worked with plant medicine to resolve conflicts. So we used it for conflict resolution inside the experience. Specifically, we worked with ayahuasca, and it turned out to be an extremely healing process for all the people involved. So I personally greatly believe in conflict resolution and learning together. So it's great. I'm going to move a little bit forward. Do you foresee, what are the challenges you foresee in the near midterm future for Decriminalize Nature as you work with the California legislator?
Yeah, our greatest challenge for us is the greatest challenge with humanity, which is we swim in this sea of profiteering, in a sea of colonialism. And by that, I simply mean that our minds are sort of conditioned to think in this very top-down risk management, survival, scarcity model. And so the idea that we should decriminalize access to plants that have very strong healing effects and sometimes don't feel comfortable when they show us our darkest side. The idea that we should do that and enable community ceremony for people like you and I makes sense. Try presenting that to a state legislator who's never dealt with plant medicines or psychedelics, and it sounds absurd, right? What are you talking about? You want me to decriminalize drugs? Anybody can do these drugs? And so the greatest challenge for all of us as human beings, but also in this movement, is educating the higher you go in politics, the less informed they are about what's happening on the ground. And so the education becomes so much more important. And so that's the greatest challenge, is because the other models, the clinical, the medical, the pharmaceutical, the corporate models, don't have to do that education. They're already sort of approved as is in society because it's the models that we've built. And so we have a long way to go in the education process, and we recognize that we do have that struggle, and we may not be ready for it as humanity, frankly, to decriminalize all of these and enable access at this point. Eventually we will, because I think we're going to get to the edge of the cliff of climate change and social injustice and unjust wealth distribution and authoritarian government. And we're going to come to that cliff as humanity and say, oops, maybe the way we've been doing things doesn't work. Maybe we have to underlay our technological innovations, our scientific research with a greater ancient wisdom. And when we get to that point, then we'll look for new models. I hope we're ready now, because I'm afraid that 20 years from now, we may be too late on climate change. We may be too late on the injustices we're creating. Authoritarian governments really are rearing their heads high. And so I think we're ready now. I'm hopeful, but at the end of the day, we'll see if we're ready.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that. All right, I have another question that I wanted to ask you. There is the medicalization model, the legalization model, and the decriminalization model, and some other models. I'd like to ask your view about the different models, and how do you see Decriminalize Nature moving together with the other models? Is it a way to push? You're supporting one form of advancement, or you're supporting all forms of advancement? What's your view? What's the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, and our motto for a long time. Let me just turn off my alarm. Our motto for a long time has been decriminalize first or simultaneously. And I'll explain it this way. So getting back to the tomato example, if I'm growing tomatoes and they're decriminalized, I can use them at will. I can share them with friends. I can grow them. I can gather them. I can grow an acre of tomatoes if I want, as long as I'm not manufacturing them or selling them. If I start selling tomatoes on the street corner, then I should probably get a business license, because that's the system we've set up in the US. But I can grow them. And now once I start selling tomatoes, be it on the corner at a farmer's market, or or manufacturing tomato sauce or tomato juice, now I'm fitting into a legalization framework. And so legalization really is about fitting into government frameworks that enable taxation and licensing and testing and all of these things, which are fine and great, and we support those. But if you do those before you do decriminalization, what happens is you create economic pressures against decriminalization.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this in cannabis all the time. If I start growing 20 plants in the front and sharing those, then suddenly I'm going to have local cultivators looking at me and wondering, what are you doing here? You're competing against us. And if they're paying licenses and paying taxes, and so we create this rubric of pressures against decriminalization. So what we are saying is decriminalize first or simultaneously, which incidentally is why our Oregon groups came out against 109, because 109 in Oregon, which is a clinical model, in 2018 removed their decriminalization language, which created hostility between those who wanted to just grow, gather, gift, and give kind of the human right to grow, from those who wanted a clinical model, because a clinical model of licensing creates an economic pressure against decriminalization, because now you've created a special permits and you have special permit holders. Those special permit holders are deriving an economic benefit from holding those permits, which creates pressure against decriminalize nature or decriminalization. So what we're saying is decriminalize first or simultaneously, and we hope to get it right in California. Oregon almost got it right, but they didn't decriminalize entheogens. Otherwise, if they had done that, I think it would have been really celebrated as a great model. So we hope to get it right in California.
Okay, thank you so much. We are about to close this conversation, and if you can share again where people can find information about Decrim Nature, about the new initiative, and how you'd like them to support you, if you choose so.
Thank you. Please email us at decrimnature@gmail.com. decrimnature@gmail.com if you'd like to support us, or you can just go online and find the emails for our council members. They're all online, the Oakland City Council members, and just send them your opinions of why you think they should decriminalize entheogens and protect sacred ceremony. But if you email us, we will help guide you. We have a template already set up about how you can, who you can email and how to email them. We'd love your support.
Thank you so much. We are calling for activism. We're calling for people to support grassroots movements. Thank you, Plant Medicine, and the Thank You Plant Medicine community group, and everything we're doing is about destigmatizing, educating, sharing personal stories of growth and transformations. We're working with entheogens and psychedelics, so we can live in a society that respect them, appreciate them, that support cultivation, support indigenous rights, support plurality of practices, and so we are all behind in that sense. I thank the viewers and everybody watching today this conversation with Carlos from Decriminalize Nature. Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you for showing up and bringing your energy into this stream.
And thank you, Jonathan, and all of you at Thank You Plant Medicine for your great work and for being great allies with us through this journey. And may we look back in 10 years and celebrate all of our work.
Yeah, looking forward to sitting in ceremony with you.
Likewise. Okay.
Bye.